All right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Lieutenant Commander Schmidt. Hopefully not tired of my voice just yet. Over the last few months, Miss Darcy Painter and I have had the great honor of becoming close friends and hearing the stories of a true American air power hero, retired Air Force Colonel Ken Cordier. Colonel Cordier today will deliver a presentation on his experience as a prisoner of war during Vietnam, of which he was held for over 6 years. He has an incredible story about his time as a POW, as well as his post-release career and how he continued to excel thanks to his passion for the United States Air Force. Prior to him coming on stage, please enjoy this short video about his career. Retired Air Force Colonel Ken Cordier was selected as an Eagle for his courage, innovation, and resilience. He was born and raised in Ohio and wanted to be a pilot from the age of 4. After graduating from the University of Akron, he was commissioned in the United States Air Force and assigned to Chanute Air Force Base, Illinois. While there, he screened to attend pilot training and volunteered for the F-4 Phantom. In 1964, he deployed to Ubon Royal Thai Air Base, Thailand, with the 45th Tactical Fighter Squadron, and flew 59 combat missions. After his deployment, he attended the Squadron Officer School at Maxwell Air Force Base, Alabama. In 1966, he deployed with the 559th Tactical Fighter Squadron to Cam Ranh Bay, Vietnam. And then, on his 175th and a half mission, he was shot down by a North Vietnamese surface-to-air missile just north of Hanoi. Colonel Cordier was detained as a prisoner of war for over 6 years. Despite being tortured, starved, and beaten, he worked daily to keep his own spirits up along with his cellmates. He communicated through innovative techniques using the tab code and chips of roofing towel to write on dirt floors. He made wine out of rations of Cuban sugar mixed with saliva and dried fruit from care packages they rarely received. He loved the Air Force and wanted to continue flying, so after his release he jumped back into active duty. He attended the Armed Forces Staff College, re-qualified as a pilot in the F-4 Phantom, and served in a number of staff jobs. While on active duty, Colonel Cordier was very active, supporting his fellow Vietnam prisoners of war. His career culminated as the Air Attaché to the United Kingdom, after which he retired in 1985. He and his wife Barbie have been very active in supporting veteran and prisoner of war organizations since his retirement. Colonel Cordier has returned to Hanoi, Vietnam with his fellow POWs, visiting the sites where he landed and the infamous Hanoi Hilton. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the Gathering of Eagles stage, Colonel Ken Cordier.
Well, good afternoon. Isn't it great to be alive and free? I'll spend the next few minutes relating how I lost part of both of those precious commodities for 6 years and 3 months. Getting shot down is just the most incredible change of state that you can imagine, and I'll get into that in a minute. But we were assigned a mission on the 2nd of December of '66, and it was just sort of a routine mission to go up over North Vietnam and escort a B-66 electronic warfare bomber. In a briefing, they told us that this B-66 had the new raw gear and would alert us when a SAM was launched against us. That wasn't the case. We joined up over Thailand and did an aerial refueling. And then we joined up with the B-66 over Channel 97 in Laos. And then we proceeded flying a track from Yen Bai on the Red River to the Chinese border, down to Hanoi, and returning to Yen Bai. We made the turn there, and I was not expecting a SAM for sure, because we'd had no warning, no SAM launch. And I found out later that this B-66 didn't have anything. He was just an ELINT bird. Well, we're flying along there, and by the way, my backseater was on his first mission, and he really shouldn't have been there. And he wasn't expecting what happened. Of course, I wasn't either. Anyway, we made this turn, and I made a clearing turn looking for MiGs, and all of a sudden there's a thump, and the airplane sort of lurched. And faster than I can tell, I look down, and the fire lights are flashing, and we're going out of control. I had no stick authority. First, I was up against the canopy and then down in the seat, doing a fishtail maneuver. I realized this is a gut shot, and I yelled to the backseater, Mike Lane. I said, "Mike, we're hit, eject." And he was still about a mile behind the airplane, and poor guy. And he told me later, he says, "I thought you said, oh shit, something." And he said, "Then I saw your canopy go and the blast of wind, and I realized that what you meant, and so I pulled my handle." Well, in those days, we didn't have sequenced ejection. If the front seater pulled his handle, he went first. Normally, we wouldn't do that because of the wind blast and danger from debris. Well, Mike popped out then, and I get out and I open him. By the way, I'm at 24,000 feet and 500 knots. I opened my eyes, and the first thing I saw was my F-4 blow up out there. Well, I'm in the Martin Baker. The little drogue chute is deployed. My seat is stabilized, and I look around, I look down, and to my horror, they fired 2 SAMs at me, and here's the second one blowing up right down below me. And there's this big red and orange fireball looking like the gates of hell, and I was headed right for it. Well, this was a seminal moment in my life, and made me realize that there's a God, and the hand of God turned out was around me, because I got through this fireball without a scratch. And I know I wasn't hallucinating, because when I got on the ground, I reeked of gunpowder. And later I discovered that my eyebrows and eyelashes were burned off, where the flame had gone up under the visor. Well, I got through it, as I say, but to emphasize how miraculous this was, I had to be at the right angle and airspeed to fall through the expanding ring of shrapnel that results when a SAM detonates. And I didn't get a scratch, not even a John Kerry splinter in my arm. So I get through this fireball, and I realize I'm still alive, but I felt this terrible feeling in my chest of panic. It's the only time in my life I ever experienced this. And I had this panicky feeling that if I didn't get out of that ejection seat, I'd ride it into the ground, because this hot fireball surely burned the little drogue chute that is critical to the automatic seat separation and personnel parachute extraction and all that. You can eject and not have to do anything until you hit the ground and release the canopy. So I felt surely the little drogue chute is gone, and I got to get out of that seat. Well, I'm still must be maybe 20,000, at least 18,000. So I did what I was trained not to do. I did everything wrong. In spite of my preparation, I pulled the guillotine handles, squeezed the trigger, that chopped the lap belt and shoulder harness. I pushed away from the seat. As soon as I was clear of that, I just had to see the parachute canopy, so I grabbed the D-ring and I pulled it. Big mistake, because that chute deployed, as you probably know, with a terrific opening impact. And it was so strong it ripped out 2 panels of the parachute. So now I'm going down faster than I should be, and I'm much higher than I should be. So I just had to ride it down, and I'm looking around, and there's a undercast below me, and I looked up, and there was Mike Lane in his chute. What a wonderful feeling that was. Well, I don't know how long it took me to get down to the level of the cloud, which was probably around 5,000 or 6,000 feet, and I settled through it. It was like sinking into a layer of cotton candy. A very serene, quiet, and peaceful sensation. And if it wouldn't have been for the extreme moment, I think I would have enjoyed it. Not that I've ever gone sport shooting, but it really was a vivid memory. Well, I get below the cloud deck, and I look around. This just isn't my day. There's no jungle. Most of the missions I had flown were over jungle. And it's just little villages and rice paddies and no place to run and hide. So I knew when I hit the ground I was going to be very vulnerable. So I'm going down, I hit the ground and roll over and release the cords and looked around, and here's a couple of dozen farmers running across the rice paddy, and they're yelling and carrying on, and 2 of them had a AK-47, and they're going like this. Well, I had just seen that movie Bridges at Toko-Ri a week before I got shot down. You remember that? Bill Holden, Navy fighter pilot, got shot down, and here are these North Vietnamese running down or Chinese, whatever, running down the hill after him, and he pulls out his .45 and he shoots it out with him. And then they're shooting, and the screen goes black, and you assume that he's been killed. Well, he went home to his mansion in Beverly Hills that night, and I knew I wasn't going to any mansion. So I looked around, and I took my service revolver, and I threw it as far as I could. And this is why I don't like people to refer to me as a hero. I stood up and put up my hands. I was quickly captured and marched off to their village. Now, the village was maybe less than a kilometer away. And they held me, and my backseater joined us at the village. And so we were held together for quite a long time. I mean, like maybe a couple of hours. Well, I went back to Vietnam a couple of times to try to find that village and thank him for not killing me. Some of the stories about guys that were captured near where they were bombing were pretty severely treated. Well, they explained to me that back in those days, they didn't have a telephone in the village. And they had to have one of their young men jump on a bicycle and cycle into the nearest town that had a telephone, call the Army, and launch them to come and pick us up. So they eventually did, and then the rough stuff started. They stripped us to our jockey shorts, blindfolded us, tied our hands behind us, and threw us in the back of a truck. And off we went to Hanoi. So the rest of that afternoon and all evening, they'd stop at every village and put us on display. And a cadre would jump up on the cab, the truck, and bullhorn and start whipping them up, and you'd hear angry voices gathering around us. Same scenario every place we went. They start throwing little stones at us and whacking us with bamboo sticks. And it didn't really hurt us. It was just disconcerting because we were still blindfolded and we couldn't see what was happening. Well, that was bad enough. Like I say, disconcerting. But the worst thing was they all wanted to spit on us. And by the time I got to Hanoi the next morning, I was covered with spit. And I didn't get to take any kind of a bath for about a week. pretty disgusting. Anyway, here we are village hopping, and we finally get to Hanoi in the morning. You could tell we were getting into a city because of the traffic noises. And every intersection, we could hear Vietnamese language on loudspeakers. They had loudspeakers at every intersection. I guess that was so the people could get their ration of propaganda. Well, we ended up pulling into some kind of a compound, pulled out of the truck, and put into a room, made to sit down. Now, I didn't say it, I don't think, but they stripped us to our jockey shorts in addition to the blindfold and the hands tied. Anyway, I was made to sit on the floor, and so here I am sitting on the floor, jockey shorts, blindfolded, hands tied. And presently, an English speaker came into the room and started asking questions in English. And he started out with the usual name, rank, service number, date of birth, and I went along with that. Why not? And so then he started moving into the military realm. What kind of airplane were you flying? What base were you from? All this kind of stuff. And I said, I can't answer that. Well, he acted like he was angry and said, why not? You must answer our questions. And what right do you think you have to oppose us? And I said, your country signed the Geneva Conventions on the treatment of POWs. I knew that because I'd been to SOS 2 years earlier and learned all about the communists. And anyway, he said, nonsense. You are a war criminal. You're not a prisoner of war. And that's because this is an undeclared war. Your country is violating our airspace and committing crimes every day, and you were helping them. So you will be tried as a war criminal. And the only hope you have of ever going home someday is that you confess your crimes and work with us to end the war, meaning provide propaganda. Well, I refused to go any further, and so he acted very angry. He got up and left and came back a while later, and same routine and the same answer. He said, you're going to be severely punished. And I thought, oh yeah, I'd been watching Hogan's Heroes, and I thought I'll be in the cooler for a month. That was a pipe dream. Anyway, we go through another one of these so-called interrogations, and again he leaves in a rage, yelling at me, and you're going to be severely punished. And he came back the third time, and they removed my blindfold, and here's three little guys with their little beanies with a red star and looking very stern. And so he resumed the interrogation. And again, I said, I can't answer these questions. I'm not obliged to. And he said, very well, you will now suffer the punishment. And so they untied my hands and arms and they already took the blindfold off, and he said punishment in Vietnamese. And so they put me into this rope situation with the manacles like was described this morning. And just went away and left me. And I'd never experienced anything like this. Of course, they don't teach it at survival school or SEER school, like waterboarding. And by the way, does anyone here think that waterboarding is torture? Raise your hand. Don't be afraid. Well, I can tell you waterboarding is not torture because it does no permanent damage. It makes you very uncomfortable as long as they're pouring water on your face. But it's not torture. There's no permanent damage other than maybe emotional. And we only ever did it 3 times. To hear some of these politicians talk, you'd think we'd been waterboarding half of the people over there. But anyway, only 3 were ever subjected to waterboarding. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed of 9/11 fame and 2 other high rankings. And they spilled their guts. It was very effective. And so I'm all in favor of waterboarding, and I wish that's what they would have done to me. So anyway, we get into this interrogation after I screamed loud enough and long enough, and certainly it wasn't more than an hour. Some of the guys stayed in it too long. One fellow, Ray Voden, lived behind me, and he couldn't use his hands for 3 months. They had to give him a cellmate to feed him. So it wasn't anything to be taken lightly. Well, they came back and loosened the ropes and resumed the interrogation. And I thought, golly, I got to do something. I can't take this. And so I thought, well, I'll just start making up answers as I go along. Well, this guy, I wouldn't call him a professional, guy we called a rabbit, but he could tell that I was just having him on and making stuff up. So again, he feigned anger and he said, "You are wasting my time. You will be severely punished." And what could I say? So they wrapped me up again, and at this point I'm still feeling pretty brave. I've only been a POW for a few hours. So I'll never forget these words. I said, "This is barbaric. You're torturing me, and I need to see a doctor." And he goes like this. He looks at me. He said, "You're not bleeding. What's the matter with you?" And I said, "I think my back is broken. I'm in a lot of pain." And, and he jabbered something, and he pointed to me, and this time they pushed me down, put me in the ropes again, but they tied a rope around my neck and my ankles, pulled me back as far as they could. Well, folks, this gave new meaning to the word pain. And this time I didn't last as long. I mean, I was in such pain. I was laying on the floor. I tried raising up and falling as hard as I could against my head to try to knock myself out and get a few minutes of respite. Didn't work. All I did was make my head sore. Anyway, not as long this time, maybe 15 minutes. I don't know. I didn't have a watch at that point. So they came back in, untied me, and like Bill said, coming out of the ropes was almost as bad as going in, because when the blood starts flowing again and your nerves aren't being pinched, it's sort of a reverse pain. I don't know how to describe it. But at any rate, I'm yelling and spitting and carrying on, and came back and started the interrogation again. Well, I noticed that one of these guys was taking copious notes, everything I said. So I thought, I've got to make up a story, but I've got to be able to stick with it and not go against what I've told him previously. So I decided I'm going to answer the questions, and I'll multiply everything by 3. They wanted to know the range of the airplane, range of our radar. I said, we could pick your MiGs up on our radar when they were taking off from Fujian, and things like that. So everything I multiplied by 3, and they're taking notes. And I was able to stick with that, and I thought, this won't last long because this is so absurd. If they know anything about airplanes, they'll know that I'm just making it up. But they didn't. And 2 days of interrogations using this technique, they never questioned me. And they even brought in a Vietnamese pilot, and I know he was a pilot because he had threads where the rank would have gone, and he had threads here where the wings would have gone. And he asked me some simple flying questions like, what's the worst position that we could attack you? And I said, 12 o'clock out of the sun. I wrote that down. He wasn't really serious about getting any technical information. So this went on then without the ropes, me using my same evasive answer technique for 2 days. And one of the interrogations was at night. Night interrogations were always effective because they'd wake you up in the middle of the night. The interrogator was pissed off because he had to be working the midnight shift, and you were rattled from being awakened and taken to quiz. Well, then on the 3rd day, they came in with the manacles and the ropes and slammed it on the table and said, "Now you will write your war crimes confession." And I said, I really can't do that because I haven't committed any crimes. Well, big screaming lecture. And, called the guy that did the ropes and the manacles, and I'm here to confess I didn't last more than 5 minutes because each time it got worse. And so I said, okay, what do I have to write? Untied me and put a paper in front of me that I had to copy in my own handwriting. And this had 4 paragraphs, short paragraphs. First one was that I condemned the war actions of the United States, that I had confessed that I have committed crimes, serious crimes against the DRVN, bombing innocent villages, killing women and children. The third one was I begged for the forgiveness of the Vietnamese people. And the last one, ceiling's leaking. The last one was that I thanked the Vietnamese people for their lenient and humane treatment. Sign my name. Make you want to barf. Anyway, that was it. As soon as I did that, they left the room, had me escorted to the area we called Heartbreak Hotel, where they had these little cells. And I was put in one of them for a few hours, during which they came around and gave me my issue, which was 2 pairs of striped pajamas, a tin cup, a pair of rubber tire Ho Chi Minh sandals, we called them, and a mosquito net, which is the one humane thing they did, because climate like Houston, the mosquitoes were thick. You could hear them at night, zzz, buzzing. So the mosquito net was much appreciated, and then a thin cotton blanket. So that's my GI issue. And away we went then a couple hours later out into the courtyard, got into a truck, and they drove us to what at the time was the main prison we called the zoo. And that's where most of us were kept. Well, I was shown into a solitary room, bare light bulb hanging there, and pushed in there and slammed the door, and that was it, my new home. Well, it's really hard to get your mind around that change of state. I mean, 1 minute you're master of the universe, hotshot fighter pilot flying this latest jet, and seconds later you're helpless in a parachute. And you know, you can always tell a fighter pilot, but you can't tell him much. And that was me. So I had it took me a while to get my mind around it. And I was only in solitary for 1 month. So that gave me time to kind of take stock of the situation. One of the things I reflected on was falling through that fireball. I thought about that many times. And here I was, struck down, and sort of like Saul on the road to Damascus. And then I became like Job, and I sat there in filth. I eventually had 47 boils on my body, just in a miserable state with everything taken away. Actually, I kept one thing. I was able to keep the jockey shorts that I was shot down in. And so I'm dealing with that and getting interrogations almost every day. And what they were looking for is guys that would tell them what they want to hear just to get them off their back. And that meant like agreeing that we really shouldn't be there in Vietnam or something like that. I didn't do that, and I thought I'm going to take a strong pro-American stance as long as they're not beating up on me. I mean, push them as far as you can. And they didn't come back with the torture again. And just a lot of yelling and screaming, and that was it. So after a month, I was at one of these interrogations, and the guy started asking me, would I like a cellmate? And I said, sure. He said, well, if you follow the camp regulations, it might be possible. And the camp regulations was a long list of B-no's that you couldn't possibly live with. I mean, there was B-no talking. It was forbidden to talk in a normal voice. You could only whisper if you had a cellmate. B-no exercising. If you were caught exercising, they'd put you in handcuffs and leg irons for a week. And B-no singing, B-no whistling, B-no having fun. And so I went. Well, I said, sure, I can do that. And when I agreed, in walked Mike Lane, my backseat pilot, and he was my first cellmate. Well, they led us to a new building, different building, a new room, and it was 7 feet by 9 feet. And there were boards arranged like an L shape with enough space here to take 3 paces back and forth. And that was the only exercise we were permitted. I describe these cells with 5 Bs. First B is the boards that we slept on. Second B is the bulb. There's a bare light bulb overhead, and it was never turned off, day or night. It was always on. And the reason is, for the third B, there were bricks. They bricked up all the windows so we couldn't see out or ever get a look at another prisoner. A fourth B was the box. There was a small loudspeaker box on the ceiling of each cell, and that's how they piped in the propaganda and re-education attempts and the voice of Vietnam. Have you ever heard of Hanoi Hannah? Well, she was an English-speaking Vietnamese broadcaster that they had this station that beamed to the GIs in South Vietnam. And she'd read propaganda and read off the list of names of who had been killed the day before. Got that from the Stars and Stripes. And then she would end with playing 2 popular American songs, which was the highlight of the day for me. 1966, songs like Petula Clark singing Downtown. And that was our slang for going to missions over Hanoi and Haiphong, going downtown. And the other one I loved was Nancy Wilson singing It's the Good Life. Little cocktail piano in the background, and made me think of a place I used to like to go to in San Francisco on weekend cross countries. So that was the beginning of the day. They rang a gong, which was an empty 85 millimeters shell casing. They beat on it with a wrench, and that was a signal to get up, so fold up your mosquito net. And we were supposed to sit on our bunk and think about our crimes. This is what we were instructed, until the voice of Vietnam at 6 o'clock. And then at 6:30, we were supposed to continue thinking about our crimes and wait for the morning meal. Morning meal came around 9 o'clock in the morning, and it was a small bowl of rice and a same-sized bowl of soup, not Campbell soup. It was, in the summertime, it was boiled greens. Think of a cross between spinach and seaweed. No meat, no seasoning, just boiled slimy greens. And the fall was a good time. We'd get, excuse me, we'd get squash, boiled squash. I like squash, so that was a good time. And then in the winter was the worst. 4 months of boiled cabbage, slimy, stinking cabbage, twice a day. Well, then after the morning meal, we're supposed to get outside for 10 minutes to bathe. But the guards were lazy, and all they wanted to do was hang about and smoke cigarettes and shoot the breeze with their buddies. And they certainly didn't enjoy having to stand guard with a couple of naked Americans taking a bath with a bucket of water we draw from the well, muddy water, and pour on ourselves and wash with lye soap. Once a week, get to shave, lye soap, and a rusty Bulgarian razor blade. Well, as soon as we'd get out there, they'd be yelling at us, quickly, quickly, and put us back in the cell. And we kept track of it. 2 to 3 times a week is what we get. And in those, in that hot climate, in those rooms with no ventilation, you can imagine how miserable that was, sweating, sometimes days, even weeks at a time, never stopped sweating. And so that was the morning. And then at noon, they'd ring the gong, and we were allowed to take siesta. Like most backward equatorial third world countries, they take siesta during the heat of the day. Well, that seems like a good idea, right? If you're asleep, you're out of that lousy environment. Not so fast. Remember I told you we were forbidden to speak, and certainly forbidden to try to communicate with prisoners in other cells. Well, we had the TAP code, the 5x5, and everybody got real proficient at that. And I hated it because they left out the K, and my initials are KC, and guys always spelled my name wrong. Well, this gave us a 2-hour nap period, gave us 2 hours to communicate, and we really went after it. And that was our only communication with other prisoners. And the first thing was, who's in the building? Get the names, memorize the names. And that, in fact, that was a directive from the SRO. Memorize the name of everyone you come in direct contact with. And that's so when we finally get out of here, we'll be able to, everyone write down their names, cross-reference them, and hopefully account for everyone, which is what we did in the event when we finally got out. And it's pretty amazing. We accounted for everybody, including the ones that died in prison. And I don't believe any of this urban legend that you may see about guys that were sent to Russia or wherever. I don't think that ever happened. The Vietnamese weren't sophisticated enough to be able to capture guys when they land, take them somewhere predetermined, hide them, and ship them off somewhere. Because some of the towns didn't even have a telephone. So how could they coordinate something like that throughout the whole country? I don't think it could possibly happen. Well, now we're at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, 2 o'clock, and what do? We wait for the evening meal. Evening meal is a repeat of the morning meal, and then we wait for the Voice of Vietnam at 8 o'clock, and that was a repeat of the morning broadcast. And then at 9 o'clock, they rang the gong, and we're allowed to drop our mosquito net, lay down on the board, and go to sleep until 5 in the morning and do it all over. And it went on like this for months and years. And unless you were getting pulled out for interrogation, every day was the same. And people say, well, how did you keep track of the dates and everything? The Voice of Vietnam, they always talked about the dates, and they did celebrate holidays. Tet, the Chinese Lunar New Year, being one of them. And they even recognized Christmas and give us a special meal at Christmas. And then on Vietnamese Independence Day in September, that was a national holiday, and they celebrated and gave us a little better rice and extra cigarettes. We got 3 cigarettes a day, by the way. And so these holidays, we'd mark them off. And keeping track of we had sort of a elitist system. When you got to 1,000 days, that was cause for celebration. So you'd tap on the wall and pass around, I'm 1,000 days today. Big deal. So that got to be an old hat. And then it was 2,000 days. When you hit 2,000 days, that was a cause for celebration. So we're living like this week, month after month, and everything was the same. If you'd be outside and you'd irritate the guard, they had certain limits that they could administer corporal punishment. One of them was they'd make you kneel down. One guy next to me, he got slapped around for looking disrespectfully at the guard. And they'd make you kneel down and take a rubber tire sandal and whack you across the head and face. We call that a facial, not Mary Kay. So we got that to contend with. If you did something else that was a minor infraction, they might make you stand and hold the wall up until the 9 o'clock gong. That gets uncomfortable. And then the next degree was kneeling. They'd make you kneel on the cement floor, hands over your head, and hold that position until 9 o'clock. Well, you can't do it, you know. Knees really start to hurt. So if you're fortunate enough to have a cellmate to peek under the door and let you know when a guard was coming, well, then you could get up on your knees and act like you'd been there all the time. So this is how we lived. And once in a while, somebody would get careless and get caught tapping on the wall. That was really bad news, because their default was to put you in the rows. If they really wanted something, they'd put you in the rows. Well, the guy would break, and it'd be a terrible thing to have to give up the name of the guy next door that you were tapping to. Just awful, because you knew what was going to happen to him. So they pulled him out, tortured him, made him admit, yeah, he was talking to John Prodak next door, and on and on. And pretty soon they'd find out that not only were all the rooms in a building in communication, but the buildings were communicating through various covert ways of passing the tap code, which Bill mentioned this morning. So the net result was the cloud had a silver lining. Am I keeping him up? You're catching flies, man. So they'd find out that the entire camp was networked and communicating, and that really drove them up the wall. They couldn't stand it, that we were organized. So they would have a camp shuffle. And on a particular night, they'd open all the doors, and they'd lead guys to the other side. My backseater went to the other side of camp. Somebody from here came into my cell. And when they were all done, everyone was shuffled. And that was wonderful. I mean, a few guys suffered being tortured, but we all got new cellmates. Think of it. You're locked up for 6 months or a year in a little cell with one person. How long do you think it takes to hear all his stories and about all his girlfriends and where he'd been, what airplanes he'd flown, all that? How long do you think that takes? If you two were thrown together for the first time, how long do you think it would take? A week. 10 days if it's really an interesting person. So this was wonderful. And then, you know, after a couple of months or so, you get tired of hearing the same stories over and over. And life would go on. And dealing with boredom was a real challenge, because they couldn't interrogate. You know, they only had a handful of English-speaking officers, and they couldn't interrogate you every day. And sometimes they get mad and smack you around, but it was pretty boring, really. Unless you got pulled out for an interrogation, why, there wasn't much excitement, much going on to break up the monotony. And, of course, we never had pencil and paper. We never had a book to read. Once in a while, we get a little pamphlet of communist propaganda, but never any pencil and paper or books or games, anything to occupy you. You're supposed to think about your crimes. Well, life went on like this for a couple of years for me, 3 years from the guys that were shot down in '65. And we just, had gotten into this routine, and pretty hard to keep your morale up. I had what I called forced optimism. And that is, every morning when I do my exercises, I'd go up on my toes, balance on the wall, and I'd go. As long as I could hold that, I'd do about 5 reps of that. I got that from a Steve McQueen movie, The Great Escape. And they'd get shaved once a week, and they'd stick their head out the inspection door, and he'd say, "How do I look?" "You look awful." And this was happening to us because there was nothing to smile about. All the jokes had been told and were old, and nothing to laugh about there. And we were getting this down at the mouth. And that's why I started the smile exercise. Some of the guys joined in, and others said, Cordier's over there grinning like a Cheshire cat, and it's not doing him any good. So here we are, just wondering when the war's ever going to end. And then 3 days before the 1968 election, we always got the bad news. They came on the Voice of Vietnam and announced that the U.S. has unconditionally stopped bombing North Vietnam. And I guess this was to show that Johnson's party was the party of peace, and if we got a Democrat in the White House, that the war would soon be over. Well, that wasn't to be, of course. But some of the guys were very encouraged and optimistic that, well, at least the Vietnamese will probably ease off the bad treatment and maybe leave us alone more and not harass us so much. That wasn't the case. Actually, the treatment got worse. And my theory was that they felt that the U.S. government had written us off. At the time, about 350 POWs. And so they could do whatever they wanted to. And so very quickly we noticed a shift, and where they used to do these facials I told about for minor offenses, they'd make you strip naked, lay face down on the ground, get a guard on either side of you with a truck fan belt, and lay it to you so that when you came back to your cell, your red X's up and down your back from your neck to your buttocks. Not quite like the stripes of Jesus. They didn't have metal pieces in there to flay your flesh, but still raised red stripes. Pretty painful. And they started putting more guys in irons permanently, at least a month at a time. So we had guys in irons everywhere, these beatings, and of course the bricks and the heat. And it was really wearing us down. We used to say they're making old men out of young men. Well, the Lord smiled on us and recalled Ho Chi Minh. He died in September of '69. And they had a month of national mourning, and nothing moved, nothing happened in camp. But once the funeral music and everything was over and the mourning period was over, things started to change. I mean, really rapidly. Where I said we had all the cells, the windows were bricked up, the first thing they did was they came around and they knocked the bricks out of the windows. That was really a major thing. And then they came on the camp radio and told us that we didn't have to bow anymore. Bowing was always a big thing. We resisted bowing. We were supposed to bow politely to every Vietnamese we encountered, including the kitchen people when they brought our water ration to the cell. Well, they said we didn't have to bow anymore. Well, that was great, but we shouldn't have been resisting bowing anyway. I was being marched off to interrogation one day, and this camp dog came trotting across. And they brought in a few dogs every year for Tet. They love dog meat, and they'd fatten them up and eat them at Tet, like turkey for Thanksgiving. And so I saw this dog, and I stopped, and I came to attention. I gave a polite, deep bow. Well, the guy with the gun on me, he knew exactly what I was inferring, and he gave me a rifle chop to the ribs. And other than a sore ribs for a few days, I didn't suffer a cracked rib, for which I was very lucky. Took me to the interrogation room and told the officer what I had done. And he started screaming at me and carrying on and telling me I'd never go home and I'd be severely punished, yada, yada. And what was a good deal there was, normally you had to sit on a stool for 50 minutes while they yelled at you and gave you a propaganda lecture, and then back to your cell. I was very uncomfortable sitting on a low stool. In February, the weather was quite cool. It'd get down into the 40s. And so he screamed at me for a few minutes and told me to go back to my cell and think about my crimes. And I was so pleased that I got to go back to my cell and didn't have to listen to him. So that was a trade-off. but resisting bowing was a waste of energy, and we should have used that for better things. Well, Ho Chi Minh died, and then the treatment started to improve. More food and allowing us outside. Instead of 10 minutes a day, they were letting us outside for maybe an hour in the morning and an hour, a little more in the afternoon. This is wonderful. All these things happening made guys get optimistic. And they thought they must be getting ready to send us home. They're giving us more food and allowing us outside. And one guy even said, I'm not going out and stand in the sun and get a tan. I don't want to look good for the cameras. Sad. So anyway, all this treatment improves, and going into 1970, I don't know if I mentioned, but everybody that was in irons was taken out of irons. And they stopped the interrogations. That was a real plus. We didn't have to go and sit on a stool and listen to them. So that summer of 1970, they moved us to a new camp about 15 miles west of Hanoi. Conditions were much better there. The cells were larger, 8 men or 6 men to a cell. Time out in the morning, time out in the afternoon, and encouraging us to exercise and keep our health, blah, blah. And things were going along pretty well there for a couple of months. And then it got to be November. And November the 20th, the night of the 20th, 21st, we heard jets and afterburner. We heard all kinds of stuff going on, anti-aircraft fire. And of course, we had our windows open with bars so we could hear it all. And we were really excited. Here it is, the bombing is back on. Well, that wasn't the case. It was these guys in the Sante Raiders and the support. And we were told to get ready to move. In 3 days, we were moved back to Hanoi. I guess they were afraid the U.S. was going to come in and take us all home. Well, we get into Hanoi, and it's our old home, the Hanoi Hilton. And they put us in these big rooms in the compound that we didn't even know existed. Big rooms, I mean, with 50 to 60 guys in a cell. And that was really exciting. We were so excited we stayed up all night talking. Because here are these guys that we knew the names, but we'd never seen them. And it didn't take long to put a name to a face and get to know everybody in the cell. So that began a new era, which here you got 55 pilots and navigators, guys with college education, been stationed all over the world, and a tremendous mental resource, but no paper to write anything down on. And so we had to do it, use some GI ingenuity. And we needed chalk for the math courses and the biology, anything you needed to write a formula, we needed to be able to write, no paper. So the floor was worn smooth by prisoners pacing back and forth. And when we were out in the big courtyard to bathe, we'd find little pieces of orange roofing tile, which is great chalk. So we just, chalkboard doesn't have to be vertical. Here it was horizontal, and whoever the teacher was, he'd get down there and write his equations and so forth, and that worked very, very well. And then for things like languages, we always had a Spanish or French or German course going. You need to be able to write down and have a list of words. And how are we going to do that? Well, we ended up with toilet paper. We got the toilet paper in sheets about that big, which is like the stuff you get in a public restroom. And then we fashioned pens out of strips of bamboo we'd break off from the fence outside. And for ink, the best ink you can imagine in that situation was gentian violet. The medic would come around once a week and give us cotton balls soaked in gentian violet to dab on our sores and mosquito bites, which would get infected. And so we had a very usable ink, and built these these lists and anything else you needed to preserve on paper. So that really made time go by a lot faster. And it kept guys busy preparing and teaching a course, and gave guys opportunity to learn something new. Well, we went on like this all of 1970 and the rest of 70, which is just 1 month, and then all of 71. And then we got into, we got into 71, and I'm sorry, 72, and on April the 16th, we heard jets and afterburner, sticks of bombs going off, anti-aircraft fire, and then the sirens. They were so caught by surprise that it was in reverse. It should have been sirens, guns, sticks of bombs, and the jets and afterburner. So that was really thrilling. And they came back every day and bombed. And we were cheering, and the plaster was falling off the ceiling, and we'd say, "Come and get them," but not here. So that resulted in them evacuating us to the Chinese border to a jungle camp where they kept half of us for 6 months. And then after the Paris agreements were signed, they brought us back to Hanoi. January the 20th, inauguration day, the trucks rolled into camp. And the next day we're down in Hanoi Hilton again. And I'll finish it off here. The camp commander came out, and he had a podium and a mic and loudspeakers, and he jabbered something in Vietnamese, and the interpreter interpreted what he was saying, and it was the protocol on the release of the prisoners. So at that point, we all knew and would be going home. And Henry Kissinger said he put that into the peace agreement so that we'd all have the pleasure of something to look forward to until we were released, in my case on the 4th of March. And that, as a sign next to the elevator at the Clark Hospital, was welcome home. Today is the first day of the rest of your life, and it's been a wonderful, blessed one. And I thank you for your attention and for being here and giving me this opportunity.
Well, sir, Colonel Cordier, we would like to thank you for being with us today and sharing your experiences and leadership insights. But we have just a couple of minutes. Do we have any questions in the audience? Okay, no questions?
I've got one for you. We get to Clark. We're bused to the hospital,
we have one over here.
Into the hospital, and the first thing we did was get to take a hot shower. Now, I hadn't felt even lukewarm water in the 6 years and 3 months, and I stood under that hot shower until my fingers were all pruny. Then I was put on these lousy hospital pajamas and go downstairs to the cafeteria for our first meal. What do you think the first meal was? I'll tell you, steak and eggs, cooked to order, and a banana split for dessert. Well, of course, this created a line because everybody wanted their steak cooked differently. And so I was standing there waiting for my steak. And the docs couldn't wait till the next morning to start debriefing us. So this doc came by, and he stops, and he says, "Well, what have you been looking forward to all this time?" And I said, "Doc, I was 6 years and 3 months, and I never saw a woman, and I never had a sip of whiskey." And he says, "I can't help you with the former, but what kind of whiskey were you drinking?" I said, J.D. Black. And when I got up to my room after the dinner, here's a quart of Jack Daniels on the pillow. Took the lid off. Nice pull. I passed it. My buddies were all lined up. They heard what was going on, and I must have had a dozen guys there, and everybody had a pull and threw the bottle away.
We might have a question over here.
Good.
Sir.
Hey, good afternoon, sir. Major Normandin from Flight 4. Both yourself and Shortfinger earlier mentioned that after you guys were repatriated, you both decided to go ahead and serve following your time there as a POW. Could you just talk for a few minutes about what you were thinking and what led you to make that decision to go ahead and continue to serve?
Was that what I wanted to do?
Not so much was it what you wanted to do, but what led you to make the decision to continue doing it?
Well, I just love flying airplanes. I love dropping bombs and breaking things and killing people. That wasn't a very good answer, was it? No, I did love to fly, and I did want to go back to fighter operations, and I did so. And had 2 flying assignments and 2 staff assignments after the war, culminating with Attaché in London, which was what I called my payback assignment.
Any other questions? Oh, here we go. Don Tabron.
Fellow Eagle, Don Tabron. Were most of your fellow prisoners airmen? Were they naval aviators, soldiers?
We had about 30 Army soldiers from South Vietnam that had been brought up to Hanoi. The rest of us were air crew, pilots, navigators, EWOs, whatever. Did that answer?
Was there a question from here? Sir?
I'd like to tell the audience, you're looking at a guy who received a Silver Star for heroism on a combat mission, and then received a Silver Star, a second Silver Star, for heroism as contact as a POW, a true American hero.
Thank you, sir. Thank you all. Okay?
Thank you.
Thanks for what you guys did for me. That's it. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you.
Yep.